What if I told you that right now, as you're watching this, there are dozens of ghost ships drifting across our oceans, their crews simply vanished without a trace? What if I told you that deep beneath the Arctic ice, something impossibly old has just been set free? And what if I told you that the most terrifying thing about the ocean isn't what lives in it, but what it makes us become? The human mind wasn't designed for the endless blue horizon, for the crushing isolation of being surrounded by thousands of miles of nothing but water and sky. And sometimes, when you push the human psyche to its absolute limits, when you trap it in a steel box floating on an indifferent ocean, something breaks, something fundamental. Today, I'm going to share 3 stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the sea, about reality itself, and about the thin line that separates sanity from madness. But before we dive into the depths, let me set the scene for what's coming. Picture this. You're standing on the deck of a massive container ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and through your binoculars, you spot something that shouldn't exist. A beautiful yacht, perfectly intact, sails neatly furled, drifting like a ghost. You board it, and everything is immaculate. The deck is spotless, ropes coiled with precision, not a single sign of struggle or storm damage. You go below deck and find a half-eaten sandwich on a plate, still fresh, a chessboard with an unfinished game, pieces frozen mid-move as if the players simply evaporated. And then you find the ship's log, and as you read the final entries, your blood runs cold because the last words written are, "The ocean is full of song." What happened to those people? Where did they go? And more importantly, what did they hear in those final moments that made them abandon everything and walk into the waiting arms of the sea? Hold that thought, because we're going to return to that yacht and uncover what really happened. But first, if you're the kind of person who lies awake at night thinking about unsolved mysteries, about the dark corners of our world that defy explanation, then you need to hit that subscribe button right now. This channel dives deep into the stories that others are afraid to tell, the ones that make your skin crawl and your mind race. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Let me start by introducing you to the concept of maritime isolation, because understanding this is crucial to everything that follows. The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet's surface, and yet we know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the depths of our own seas. When you're out there, truly out there, beyond the sight of land, beyond the reach of easy rescue, something fundamental shifts in your perception of reality. Ancient sailors knew this, which is why they populated their maps with sea monsters and warnings of the unknown. But here's the thing that modern sailors will tell you if you get them drunk enough and ask the right questions. The real monsters aren't in the water. They're in the silence. They're in the endless repetition of waves against hull, day after day, week after week. They're in the way your mind starts to play tricks on you when the only constant in your life is the unchanging horizon and the monotonous hum of diesel engines. The ocean doesn't need to be rough to be dangerous. Sometimes, the calmest seas are the most terrifying because they give you nothing to focus on, nothing to distract you from the thoughts that start creeping in when you're surrounded by that much emptiness. Now, let me tell you about Liam Evans, a third mate on a container ship making the routine run from California to Japan. For Liam, the job was predictable, boring even, the kind of work where the days blend together into an endless cycle of watch duties and maintenance checks. He'd been doing this for years, and he thought he'd seen everything the ocean had to offer. He was wrong. It was one of those perfect days that sailors actually distrust, when the Pacific Ocean becomes a vast mirror reflecting an empty sky, and the world feels suspended in some kind of eternal present tense. Liam was standing watch on the bridge, scanning the horizon through binoculars more out of habit than any real expectation of seeing anything, when he noticed a small white speck in the distance. At first, he thought it might be a bird or a piece of debris, but as his ship drew closer, the speck resolved into something that made his stomach tighten with an inexplicable sense of dread. It was a yacht, roughly 45 feet long, and it was just drifting with the current, its sails furled neatly against the mast, no sign of damage or distress, and yet completely, utterly lifeless. Captain Rostov, a stern man shaped by decades at sea, ordered a motorboat launched to investigate because maritime law and the unwritten code of sailors demands that you check on any vessel you encounter in distress. Liam volunteered to go, driven by a curiosity that he would later come to regret. As their small motorboat approached the yacht, Cutting through the glassy water, Liam could read the name painted in gold letters on the stern, Sea Maiden. It was a beautiful vessel, the kind that wealthy dreamers buy when they decide to escape their landlocked lives and chase the horizon. Everything about it looked perfect, almost too perfect, like a museum piece floating in the middle of nowhere. They called out as they climbed aboard, their voices sounding small and insignificant in the vast silence of the open ocean, but there was no response, just the gentle creaking of the yacht as it rocked on the barely perceptible swells. The deck was spotless, and when Liam ran his hand along the polished wood of the railing, it was smooth and well-maintained, showing none of the wear and tear you'd expect from a vessel that had been abandoned or caught in any kind of emergency. The real horror began when they descended into the cabin, and I want you to really picture this moment. Imagine climbing down those narrow stairs into the dimly lit interior of a boat that should have people on it, but doesn't. Imagine the way the light filters through the portholes, creating strange shadows that seem to move when you're not looking directly at them. Imagine the smell, not of death or decay, but of normalcy, of coffee and wood polish, and the faint hint of someone's cologne still lingering in the air. That's what made it so profoundly disturbing. Inside the cabin, it looked like the occupants had simply vanished mid-activity. There was a chessboard on the small table, pieces arranged in what was clearly the middle of a game, and Liam found himself staring at it, wondering what move had been planned next, wondering if the players had any idea that they would never finish this game. In the galley, a coffee pot sat on the stove, half full, and next to it was a plate with a sandwich, half eaten, the bread not even stale yet. Liam picked up the coffee pot, and it was still faintly warm, which seemed impossible, but there it was, undeniable evidence that whoever had been here had left very recently, and yet there was absolutely no sign of where they could have gone. Do you understand what I'm describing here? This wasn't a scene of panic or struggle. This was a scene of casual abandonment, as if the occupants had simply decided, in the middle of their normal daily routine, to cease existing. Liam and his crew searched the sleeping quarters and found 2 passports lying on the bed. Robert and Catherine Finch, a married couple in their 50s from Oregon, smiling at the camera in their passport photos with the kind of hopeful expressions that people wear when they're embarking on an adventure. Their clothes were neatly folded in the closets, their personal belongings carefully stowed, books open on the bedside tables as if they'd been reading just before sleep. Everything suggested people who had been living their dream, sailing across the Pacific, and then something had happened. Something that left no physical evidence, but had nonetheless erased them completely from the world. And then Liam found the ship's log, a thick leather-bound notebook sitting on the navigation table. And this is where our story takes a turn from merely unsettling into genuinely terrifying territory. The early entries were exactly what you'd expect. Cheerful accounts of favorable winds and dolphin sightings, Catherine's excitement at finally living the life she'd dreamed of, Robert's careful notations about their position and heading. But as Liam flipped through the pages, he watched the tone change, slowly at first and then with increasing urgency. The entry from June 22nd mentioned that Catherine had become quiet, that she spent hours sitting on deck staring at the water, and most disturbingly, that she claimed to hear music, some kind of song that Robert couldn't hear at all. He'd dismissed it as the sound of wind and waves, as the psychological effects of isolation, but Catherine insisted it was real, insisted it was beautiful, and insisted it was calling to her. Can you imagine being Robert in that moment? You're alone with your wife on a small boat in the middle of the world's largest ocean, and the person you love most in the world is starting to act in ways that defy rational explanation. You want to believe it's nothing, that it's just stress or maybe a trick of the mind, brought on by the endless monotony of sea and sky, but deep down, you're starting to suspect that something is fundamentally wrong. The next entry described Catherine humming a strange, dissonant melody, something that Robert said gave him the creeps. And you have to understand that sailors are not typically people who spook easily. These are individuals who make their living in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. And yet Robert's handwriting, previously so steady and controlled, was starting to show signs of stress, the letters becoming less uniform, the lines less straight. By June 28th, Robert was openly terrified. Catherine had stopped eating. She spoke about getting closer to something, though there was nothing but empty ocean for thousands of miles in every direction. When Robert suggested turning back to Hawaii, Catherine had thrown what he described as a tantrum, screaming that he couldn't take her away from the song. Robert had locked himself in the cabin to write, and his final rational entry ended with the words, "I'm afraid of my wife. I'm afraid of what this ocean is turning her into." And here's where it gets truly chilling, because the very last entry in the log was written in different handwriting, shaky and childlike, as if Robert could barely hold the pen. It described Catherine waking him in the night, smiling with a happiness he hadn't seen in years, telling him about the beautiful song and how it called her by name. She'd kissed him, asked him not to be sad, and then walked out onto the deck. And Robert, in those final moments, had written that he could hear it too now, the music, the song from the ocean, and he was going to join her because the ocean was full of song. Liam stood in that cabin reading those words, and he felt the temperature seem to drop, felt the air become heavy with the weight of what had transpired there. The yacht was a tomb, but there were no bodies, just the ghost of a tragedy that defied every rational explanation. What song had they heard? Was it some kind of shared delusion brought on by isolation? Was it the ocean itself? That vast and alien entity? Somehow reaching into their minds and pulling them into its depths? Or was it something else? Something older and stranger? Something that we've forgotten how to name, but that still lurks in the deep places of the world, singing its siren song to those who venture too far from shore. The Coast Guard was notified, coordinates were recorded, but the yacht was left to drift because there was nothing else that could be done. It would continue its journey, a ghost ship carrying the echoes of two people who had heard something that no one else could hear and had answered its call by walking into the eternal embrace of the sea. But that's just the first story, and as disturbing as it is, it's actually the least terrifying of the three I'm going to share with you today. Let me ask you something. What scares you more, the unknown lurking outside your door or the known hiding right beside you? Keep that question in mind as we move to our second tale. Leo is a senior sailor on a bulk carrier called the Zvezda Orion. And if you've never seen one of these ships, let me paint you a picture. These are floating warehouses the size of 3 football fields, designed to carry massive quantities of bulk cargo across the world's oceans. They are not glamorous vessels, they're purely functional, all harsh angles and rust-streaked steel, and they smell like a combination of diesel fuel, salt water, and whatever cargo they happen to be carrying. In this case, the Zvezda Orion was transporting 60,000 tons of wheat from Singapore to Rotterdam, and for the first 10 days of the voyage, everything was completely routine. The Indian Ocean was calm, the sun beat down on the deck with merciless intensity, and life aboard followed the familiar pattern that sailors know well. Watches rotated, engines hummed, and the days blended together into a kind of meditative monotony. That is, until Leo went down to the 4th cargo hold to perform a routine inspection. Now, I need you to understand what a cargo hold on a bulk carrier is like, because it's important for what comes next. It's not just a room, it's a cathedral of industrial scale. A massive echoing space that extends deep into the belly of the ship. When it's filled with cargo, you're looking at hills and valleys of grain or ore or coal that rise up into the darkness, and the air in these spaces is thick and dusty, filled with particles that catch in your throat and make your headlamp beam look solid, like you're cutting through fog. Leo descended the narrow metal ladder into this space, his headlamp barely penetrating the gloom, and as he made his way along the wall, checking ventilation sensors, his light fell on something that didn't belong. At the base of one of the grain hills, he found an empty plastic water bottle and a wrapper from instant noodles with Thai writing on it. At first, he didn't think much of it. Trash could easily have fallen into the hole during loading, but then he saw the depression in the grain, like someone had been sleeping there, and next to it, another water bottle that was still half full. The realization hit Leo like a physical blow. They had a stowaway on board. This isn't uncommon in ports with lax security. Desperate people trying to escape poverty or persecution will hide in cargo holds, hoping to make it to a better life in Europe or America. But what they often don't realize is that these holds are death traps. The cargo can shift and suffocate you. The air can become toxic. And even if you survive the journey, you'll be discovered and sent back. Leo immediately reported to the captain, and a search party was assembled. They went back down into the hold, and now the space that had seemed merely dark and industrial took on a sinister quality. Every rustle of grain, every echo of their footsteps, every shadow that moved at the edge of their headlamp beams made them tense, because somewhere in this vast darkness was another human being, and they had no idea who that person was or what they might be capable of. They found him after 20 minutes of searching, a young man, maybe 17 years old, who had dug himself into the grain like a frightened animal. He was thin to the point of emaciation, covered in dust, and when they pulled him out into the light, he was trembling so violently that Leo thought he might be having a seizure. They took him to the infirmary, gave him water and food, and the kid ate like someone who had been starving, which he probably had been. The captain tried to question him, but the young man was barely coherent, speaking in rapid-fire Malay that Leo could only partially understand. He kept looking at the door, at the porthole, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Leo tried to calm him down, asked him in broken Malay why he was there and if he was alone, and that's when everything changed. The young man grabbed Leo's hand with surprising strength, his eyes wide with terror, and said in Malay, "I'm not alone. Let that sink in for a moment. Imagine you're Leo. You've just discovered a stowaway in your cargo hold, which is already a serious situation. And now this terrified kid is telling you that there's someone else on board, someone dangerous." Through broken translations and frantic gestures, the story emerged. When this young man had been hiding in the Singapore port, waiting for his chance to sneak onto the ship, he'd seen another man doing the same thing. This second person was older. The kid described him as having cold eyes and a scar on his cheek, and he was carrying a small, heavy box. The young stowaway said that this man wasn't a refugee. He was a criminal, someone running from something or running towards something, and whatever his purpose was, it was dark enough that it had scared this desperate kid into staying hidden rather than revealing himself. The implications were staggering. Somewhere on this massive ship, in its kilometers of corridors and dozens of compartments, was a potentially dangerous stranger who had been living in the shadows for over a week. He could be armed. He certainly knew the layout of the ship well enough to have evaded detection this long, and most terrifyingly, he could be anywhere. Think about that for a second. Would you feel safe knowing that a potentially violent criminal was hiding somewhere in your home, watching you, waiting? Now multiply that anxiety by the size of 3 football fields and add the fact that you're thousands of miles from any help. The Zvezda Orion had suddenly transformed from a workplace into a hunting ground, and the crew wasn't sure if they were the hunters or the prey. The captain's voice came over the ship's loudspeakers, calm but with an edge of steel, announcing emergency security measures. No one was to move around the ship alone. All unused doors were to be locked. Any suspicious sounds or sightings were to be reported immediately. Leo's shift had just ended. He should have been going to sleep. But how do you sleep when you know that somewhere in the darkness beyond your cabin door, there's a stranger who might be desperate enough or dangerous enough to do anything? He lay on his bunk, listening to every creak of the bulkheads, every footstep in the corridor, every distant clang of metal on metal, and each sound seemed laden with threat. When his watch came at midnight, he walked through the dimly lit corridors feeling like every shadow could contain a threat. Every dark corner could hide a predator. He climbed onto the bridge and took his position, looking out through the massive windows at the black ocean that merged seamlessly with the black sky. And he realized something that made his blood run cold. The ocean outside wasn't the threat anymore. The real danger was inside, trapped in this steel box with them, and there was nowhere to run. Leo is standing on that bridge right now, as I tell you this story, holding a radio in one hand and a heavy flashlight in the other. And he knows that these tools are essentially useless because the threat isn't something you can see coming across the water. It's something that could be standing right behind you in the darkness, breathing quietly, waiting for its moment. The ship will reach Rotterdam in 3 more weeks. 3 weeks of locked doors and paranoid glances. 3 weeks of wondering if every person you pass in a corridor is who they claim to be, or if they're the ghost in the machine, the predator hiding among prey. And that box the young stowaway mentioned, the small heavy box that the second man brought aboard, what's in it? Drugs? Weapons? Something worse? The not knowing is perhaps the most terrifying part of all. This brings me to a question I want you to consider. Which is worse, the supernatural horror of the Sea Maiden, where people were drawn to their deaths by something unknowable and possibly not even real, or the very human horror of the Zvezda Orion, where a flesh and blood threat lurks in the shadows. At least with the supernatural, you can tell yourself it might not be real, that there might be rational explanations, but a dangerous human being hiding in your midst, that's undeniably, terrifyingly real, and it's a reminder that sometimes the ocean isn't the monster at all. Sometimes we bring the monsters with us. But now, let me tell you about the third story, and this one is different from the first two, because it doesn't just challenge our understanding of safety or sanity, it challenges our understanding of reality itself, of human history, of our place in the universe. This story takes place in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth, where the cold can kill you in minutes and the sun doesn't set for weeks at a time. Joseph is a deckhand on a research icebreaker operating far north of Spitsbergen in the Barents Sea, taking scientists to study the effects of climate change on permanent ice formations. The ship had been pushing through ice fields for 3 weeks when they encountered something that would shake the foundations of everything the crew thought they knew about the world. It started as just another iceberg, and if you've never seen one up close, let me tell you that they're already unsettling enough without any additional strangeness. Most icebergs are white and porous, compressed snow that's broken off from glaciers, but occasionally you encounter what's called blue ice, which forms over thousands of years under immense pressure until it becomes hard as stone and transparent as glass. This particular iceberg was made of that ancient blue ice, and it jutted out of the frozen sea like a massive tooth, easily the size of a multi-story building. But it wasn't the size or even the unusual composition that made the captain slow the ship. It was what they could see inside the ice, even from half a mile away. Deep within the translucent blue, preserved like a fly in amber, was something huge and dark. The initial excitement on the bridge was palpable. Dr. Thorne, the lead glaciologist, was convinced they'd discovered a perfectly preserved prehistoric animal, a woolly mammoth or cave bear frozen at the moment of death, and the scientific value of such a find would be incalculable. As they drew closer, crew members came out on deck to witness this wonder, and Joseph stood among them, feeling the Arctic air burn his lungs with each breath, watching as the details of the iceberg resolved into greater clarity. But something was wrong. Joseph could see it in the way the captain's expression changed as he looked through his powerful binoculars, the way his smile of anticipation slowly transformed into confusion and then into something that looked almost like fear. Dr. Thorne took the binoculars and stared for a long moment, and when he lowered them, he was pale despite the cold, and he said quietly, "This can't be." What was inside that ice was not an animal. When Joseph finally got his turn with the binoculars, he saw what had disturbed them so much. Instead of the organic curves of a prehistoric creature, instead of fur and bone and the familiar architecture of biology, he was looking at straight lines and impossible angles. He was looking at a machine, or at least part of one, constructed from dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They deployed the ship's powerful zoom cameras and projected the image onto the main screen on the bridge, and that's when they saw the symbols. The surface of the object was covered in engravings, complex geometric patterns that were clearly meant to convey meaning but didn't match any known writing system. They weren't cuneiform or hieroglyphics or any alphabet that human civilization had ever developed. They were something entirely other, mathematically precise and yet completely alien, and looking at them for too long created a strange sense of unease, as if your brain was trying to parse information it wasn't designed to process. Dr. Petrakov, the ship's historian, stood transfixed in front of the screen, and Joseph heard her whisper, "This is unlike anything else. The structure of the language, if it is a language, doesn't follow any known logic." And then came the revelation that made everything infinitely worse. Dr. Thorne analyzed the ice surrounding the object and determined that it was at least 10 to 12,000 years old, which meant that whatever was frozen inside predated the Egyptian pyramids, predated the earliest human civilizations, predated everything we think of as the beginning of recorded history. Let me be clear about what this means. Either this was evidence of a human civilization so advanced and so ancient that we have no record of it whatsoever, or it was evidence of something non-human, something that had been here long before we were, something that had created technology when our ancestors were still living in caves and hunting with stone tools. The debate on the bridge was fierce. Some suggested it might be a secret Soviet satellite that had crashed, but the ice was far too old. Others proposed a Nazi prototype from World War II, but again, the dating didn't work. And besides, the technology visible in those partial glimpses through the ice looked nothing like anything from the 20th century. It looked organic and mechanical at the same time, flowing curves meeting sharp edges. And those symbols, those incomprehensible symbols that seemed to shift and change the longer you looked at them. While the scientists argued and the crew debated methods of extraction, the ice made its own decision. They heard it first as a low, drawn-out hum, a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the iceberg, and it was the kind of sound that you feel in your bones before you hear it with your ears. It reminded Joseph of whale song, but deeper, more resonant, almost mechanical in its regularity. The hum transformed into a crack, sharp and loud as a gunshot, and they watched in stunned silence as a fissure ran through the massive iceberg, splitting it like an axe through wood. The piece containing the dark object began to separate from the main mass, tilting in what seemed like slow motion, and then it crashed into the black water with a thunderous splash that sent waves radiating outward and created a cloud of ice crystals that hung in the air like frozen mist. And here's the crucial detail that Dr. Thorne noticed immediately. The piece didn't float. Normal ice is less dense than water, which is why icebergs float with most of their mass underwater. But this chunk, weighted down by whatever impossibly dense metal made up that machine inside, began to sink almost immediately. They watched it go, the blue ice becoming darker and darker as it descended, the mysterious object inside becoming just a shadow and then less than a shadow. And then it was gone, swallowed by depths that measured more than 3 kilometers. Sonar tracked it for a few seconds, but then the signal was lost, and there was nothing left but a disturbed patch of water and the memory of what they'd seen. 12 people with doctorates, 24 crew members, all of them witnesses to something that shouldn't exist. And now they had nothing but a few blurry photographs and the knowledge that somewhere in the crushing darkness beneath them, an artifact of impossible age and unknown origin was resting on the ocean floor, beyond the reach of any recovery operation. Joseph stands on the deck now, looking at the calm black water that has closed over that mystery, and most of the scientists are saying that it's lost forever, that it will remain buried under kilometers of water and silt, hidden from the world once more. But Joseph has a different thought, one that keeps him awake at night and makes him stare at the horizon with a mix of wonder and dread. That ice, he thinks, that ancient compressed ice that had held the object for 10,000 years, wasn't it essentially a prison? And if it was a prison, then breaking free wasn't an accident. Maybe the heat of global warming wasn't just coincidentally melting that particular iceberg. Maybe something inside had been waiting, patient beyond human comprehension, for the conditions that would allow its release. Maybe it's not lost at all. Maybe it's exactly where it wanted to be. Maybe it's not trapped anymore. Maybe now it's free. And if something was deliberately sealed away in ice 10,000 years ago, if some ancient civilization or intelligence went to the trouble of imprisoning it in the most remote and inhospitable region of the planet, what does that tell you about what it is? What does that tell you about why it was locked away? And what does it tell you about what might happen now that it's loose? These 3 stories, as different as they seem on the surface, all revolve around the same fundamental truth. The ocean is not just water. It's a psychological space, a place where the normal rules of reality become flexible, where isolation and emptiness can make you see things that might not be there, or blind you to things that definitely are. The Sea Maiden shows us how the vast emptiness of the ocean can create its own kind of hallucination, how the human mind, starved of stimulus and drowning in monotony, might generate its own terrors, or perhaps make itself susceptible to terrors that actually exist in frequencies we don't normally perceive. The Zvezda Orion demonstrates how the ocean's isolation transforms danger, how a threat that would be manageable on land becomes existential when you're trapped on a ship with no escape, no cavalry coming over the hill, just you and the enemy and thousands of miles of empty water. And the story from the Arctic shows us that the ocean's depths hold secrets we're not prepared to understand, that our assumptions about history and technology and even the nature of intelligence itself might be fundamentally wrong. So let me ask you directly now, what do you believe? Do you think the Finches heard something real in those final days? Or did isolation drive them to a shared madness? Do you think there are still unexplained disappearances happening on the ocean right now? Boats found empty and pristine with no rational explanation. Do you think that somewhere in the North Atlantic or the South Pacific, there are vessels drifting with the currents, their crews simply gone, and whatever took them is still out there, still singing its song? And what about the Zvezda Orion? That ship is real. It's making its way to Rotterdam right now, and somewhere in its steel corridors, there might actually be a dangerous man hiding, watching, waiting. Would you feel safe on that ship? Could you sleep knowing that? And the Arctic discovery, that's perhaps the most unsettling of all, because it suggests that everything we think we know about our world might be incomplete at best and completely wrong at worst. If there was technology that advanced 10,000 years ago, where did it come from? Where did it go? And why was this particular piece locked away in ice as if someone or something wanted to ensure it would never be found? What if the melting of the polar ice caps isn't just an environmental catastrophe, but also an archaeological one? Not revealing ancient human settlements, but revealing something much older and much stranger. What if there are dozens or hundreds of similar objects down there, waiting for the ice to release them? What if we're about to rediscover something that our ancient ancestors worked very hard to make us forget? The ocean covers 70% of our planet, and we've explored less than 5% of it. That means that 95% of the ocean floor is unknown territory, and in that darkness, in those crushing pressures where no light has ever penetrated, there could be anything. Ancient ruins of civilizations we never knew existed, colonies of creatures that evolution took in directions we can't imagine, or technology so advanced that we would have no framework for understanding it. The ocean is the last true wilderness on Earth, the final frontier that exists not in space, but right here beneath the waves. And we're only just beginning to peek into its secrets. Every time we send a submarine down to explore the depths, we discover new species, new geological formations, new ecosystems that function in ways we didn't think were possible. And occasionally, very occasionally, we discover things that make us question everything. I want you to think about something for a moment. Right now, as you watch this, there are approximately 50,000 cargo ships, tankers, fishing vessels, and pleasure craft on the world's oceans. Thousands of people are living their lives on water, separated from land by miles or even thousands of miles of empty sea. And among those thousands of people, how many do you think are experiencing something strange right now? How many have seen something they can't explain, heard something that doesn't make sense, felt a presence that shouldn't be there? Most of them won't report it because they know how it sounds. They know people will say they're crazy or tired or suffering from isolation-induced hallucinations. But what if they're not? What if the ocean really is full of phenomena that we don't understand because we've never stayed out there long enough to document them properly? What if the old sailors' tales of ghost ships and mysterious disappearances and strange lights under the waves aren't superstition, but actual observations of something real? The beauty of these maritime mysteries is that they exist in a space that's simultaneously very real and almost mythological. These aren't stories about haunted houses or cryptids in the forest. These are stories about modern vessels with GPS and satellite communications and all the technology we trust to keep us safe. And yet people still vanish, ships still disappear, and the ocean still keeps its secrets. There's something profoundly unsettling about the fact that in our hyper-connected world, where we can pinpoint our location to within a few meters and communicate instantly with anyone anywhere on the planet, there are still places where all that technology becomes meaningless, where you can be as lost and unreachable as sailors were 500 years ago. The ocean is a reminder that for all our advances, we're still very small and very vulnerable, and the natural world still has the power to humble us, to terrify us, and to make us vanish without a trace. Let me leave you with this final thought. The 3 stories I've shared with you today are based on real accounts, on actual maritime incidents and discoveries that have been documented, even if the explanations remain elusive. The yacht found abandoned with everything in perfect order. That's happened dozens of times. The stowaway who reveals the presence of another, more dangerous stowaway, that's a documented fear on cargo vessels. The discovery of anomalous objects in ice. As climate change accelerates and the ice caps melt, we're finding more and more things that challenge our understanding of history. These aren't pure fiction. They're interpretations of reality, attempts to make sense of events that defy easy explanation. And that's what makes them so much more frightening than any ghost story, because you can dismiss a ghost story as made up, but you can't dismiss the fact that ships really do disappear, that people really do go mad from isolation, that the ocean really does hold secrets we haven't begun to fathom. So the next time you're near the water, whether it's an ocean or just a lake, take a moment to really look at it. Notice how the surface reflects the sky, but reveals nothing about what lies beneath. Notice how even on the calmest day, there's something restless about water, something that moves and shifts and changes. Notice how quickly the comfortable, familiar shoreline disappears when you move away from it, how fast you can find yourself surrounded by nothing but water in every direction. And ask yourself, would you sail across an ocean? Would you trust yourself to stay sane during weeks of isolation with nothing but the horizon and your own thoughts? Would you be able to tell the difference between something real and something your mind created to fill the emptiness? These aren't idle questions. These are the questions that every sailor has to answer, and sometimes the answer they discover isn't the one they hoped for. If you've made it this far, then you're exactly the kind of person this channel was created for. You don't want easy answers or comfortable explanations. You want to peer into the shadows and see what peers back. You want to know the stories that keep people up at night, the mysteries that resist all attempts at solution. So do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because there are so many more stories to tell, so many more mysteries to explore. Leave a comment and tell me, do you believe the Finches heard something real, or do you think isolation drove them mad? Have you ever experienced something on or near water that you couldn't explain? And if you were on the Zvezda Orion right now, knowing there might be a dangerous stranger hiding somewhere in the ship, what would you do? Would you barricade yourself in your cabin? Or would you join the search parties trying to find him? Share this video with someone who loves unsolved mysteries, who appreciates a good scare, who understands that the most terrifying stories are the ones that might actually be true. The ocean is still out there, vast and indifferent, keeping its secrets and occasionally sharing them with people who venture too far from shore. Ancient mariners drew monsters on their maps, not because they were foolish or superstitious, but because they understood something we've forgotten in our modern arrogance. There are still things in this world that we don't understand, things that operate by rules we haven't discovered, things that can make us vanish without a trace, or drive us to madness, or remind us that we are not the apex predators we like to think we are. The sea giveth and the sea taketh away, as the old saying goes, and sometimes what it takes is more than just life. Sometimes it takes sanity or reality itself, or the comfortable assumptions we use to navigate the world, and in return, it gives us mystery, terror, and the humbling reminder that despite all our technology and all our knowledge, we are still just fragile creatures adrift on a planet we barely understand. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and maybe stay away from deep water. Until next time, this has been a journey into the unknown, and I'll see you in the next story.